All right. Well, because of the time of year, we'll get on to a different kind of a subject today. Not a bad one. Don't necessarily have a handout yet, but I will. I'd like you to consider a young man that was very useful to Saul of Tarsus, who changed his name to Paul. Of a Gentile background, and yet became one of his closest allies, one of his most trusted co-workers. You might be thinking I'm talking about Timothy, but I'm not. I'm talking about a guy who in the Greek language is Titon. The Latins would call him Tito. We in English translate it Titus. It's I think it's the word we get from our word Titan. It's nice to have a skilled warrior as your defender, wouldn't it? Yeah, so his name, don't know if that was the name he was born with, given at birth. But because of the time of year, you can ask the question, and it's good to ask the question often. What time is it? If someone were to come up to you on the street and ask you that, what would be the first thing you do? Right? Or, oh, my phone. Or I'd look back there. But that's not what we're talking about. The Apostle Paul, because of his background, his study, in all of the preparations that God had for taking care of our sin. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it till the day I die, I believe. The Bible message is just one topic, just one. It's really about one person and what he was here for. From Genesis 3, we find out the reason, the motive. And the book of Revelation calls him the one who, do it this way for you, who was, who is, and who is to come. In Hebrew, the name Yahweh, the name God chose for himself at the burning bush with Moses. That's what it means. It is believed by many Hebrew scholars that Yahavah, the name Yahweh, is a contraction of their Hebrew word for each of the time periods. The was is coming is what it would be like in English. That's what God wanted to be known as, is the was is coming. The eternal one. The one who was, who is, and who will be. He's always there. In the Bible, they could not pronounce his name, so you'll see the newer translations, the NIV that I use, capitalizes all of the 4 letters for Lord. Because Jewish people did not want to take his name disrespectfully. They didn't want to say it. It comes from a superstition way back in paganism, where if you said the God's name, you were calling on him for help, and if you really didn't mean it, he'd zap you. And that it comes true in a lot of the different things that we have. When we think about God, is actually a shortened form in English of the word for good. So when one person came to Jesus, he said, "Good teacher, what must I do to be saved?" So why did you call me good? Because that word comes from, Jesus wanted to see if he had recognized who he was. Because he never did say that he was God in the flesh, but he allowed other people to say it. And he was wanting to know where this guy was in his faith. Because Jesus then could take them where they were and bring them to where they needed to be. This time of year, all the years I was growing up in our fellowship, it was almost as if we were not allowed to talk about the coming of Jesus, the first coming. Because some elements from non-religious sources have crept in. I think now, in my old age, that's very unfortunate. world is thinking about it. Jesus took the people from where they were and filled them in on what they needed to know. And I think a lot of the work has already been done for us. Why would you reinvent the wheel? Take them from where they are and bring them the rest of the way. The time period that we are living in is what Paul called the almost but not yet. The already but not yet. Maybe that's a better way to put it. The religious world today, after Christianity was legalized by Constantine, he had some of his professors, you might say, in his wisdom teaching, study this Christian religion. And what they did is very wisely went back to the beginning. They started from the beginning and came up to the point at which they were. They realized then that they were living between two different time periods. They were living in God's actions in the past that should influence our life in the present while looking forward to what's coming in the future. The Greeks had a word for it. They called it they said epiphania. Does that sound familiar? You know what an epiphany is? It's when something is noticeable and, oh yeah, the light bulb clicks on. Yeah, oh, okay, I get it. An epiphany. It just suddenly appears. The Latins had a word, adventeo. Advent. And so this time of year, many of the people that are around you in your neighborhood, where you're working, will talk about Advent. We even look in the stores now, you can get an Advent calendar. And it's the time, it's the time that we're living in between two epiphanies, two Advents. It literally means, in the Latin, it literally means to appear. We could say it in our vernacular in English today is show up. What was invisible before, all of a sudden there it is. And that is, think about angel visits. Did they announce they're coming? Did they ask for an appointment? No, usually it's just boom, there they were. Daniel was so surprised many times with these angel visits, he passed out. It was just that stunning and brilliant. Every time they epiphanied, they adventeoed to people. They had to say, don't be afraid. Don't be startled. Listen up. Because they didn't stay long, did they? Appeared for a moment, gave a message, gone. Don't be afraid. I've got a message for you. And you can imagine a spiritual being for a moment being trapped in a physical body like ours. Claustrophobic. You want to get out of there. Don't know.
Mary didn't faint.
No, Mary didn't. Yet the angel noticed she was quite startled and she was confused with the message. He stuck around to answer it for her, which shows, his dedication to God's message as well. Poor Zechariah. At the time of Jesus' first advent, his first epiphany, the angels played a huge part. So at the time then of Epiphany, it's usually the 4 Sundays before the birth of Jesus. And honestly, we know from Scripture that we don't know when he was born. But the fact that it's a biblical subject, and I was told one time they wanted me to try out for their position in ministry. They said, this was a topic not there were topics not to teach at certain times of year. And they were discussing those and stuff like that. And I said, well, keep looking. Because if it's in the Bible, you can talk about it anytime. And I was in trouble at one place. I was helping with the children's classes. They would, actually during sermon time, they would have their own Bible study in a separate area. And that was, I guess, reduce the distractions among the adults. That was kind of a silly thing, but it's what they wanted. I thought I'll take advantage of it. And this time of year, we talked about Advent, Epiphany, the first one. And the elders wanted to take me to task because the children will be confused. I said, no, I think somebody else is confused here. It's a biblical subject. People are thinking about it and talking about it. They've gotten way off track with it, haven't they? Now it's all about merchandise and economy. It's gotten so far away from what it was supposed to be that it's good to have some people take some time, bring them back to where they're supposed to be. Because really, that was what God was planning from Genesis 3 through the end of the book of Revelation. And that's why Paul says it so many times, and especially in his little letter to Titan, to his Titan, to his warrior, his defender, Titus. And it's in chapter 2 that really sets the tone for where we stand. Because, Jesus' birth was a great beginning. It was an awesome miracle. It was prepared for millennia. 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years of training. If God went to that much trouble for that long of time, maybe we need to pay a lot more attention to it. And maybe there's more to it than we think.
I guess I missed, where are we at?
Right now?
What book?
Oh, Titus.
Yes.
Pardon me?
Titus. Yeah, the little letter that Paul wrote to his Titan, his defender, his co-worker. Titus, there's a commentary I recommend. You see how worn out it is. It's written by John Stott. And if you've ever read anything by John Stott, he's already passed on, but he was a British theologian who I think had a very good understanding of Jesus and what he was here for. He's written a couple volumes on the cross and Life of Christ. I think, Dale, you were teaching Life of Christ for a while. He's written a lot of things on that. And this is a commentary on the 2 letters of Timothy and Titus. And it's called Guard the Truth. And he titles his commentary for Titus as Doctrine and Duty. And in that order, precisely. It's not our tradition and duty. It's not what's comfortable and duty. It's doctrine and duty. Titus did not have the teaching in the background of the scriptures. He was a Gentile. He was the reason why Paul got arrested in the temple when he went to visit and was almost torn apart because his critics took advantage of the mob mentality. And if it weren't for the Roman guards being in garrison in the temple precincts on the spot when it happened, they might have literally, as Luke records it, torn him limb from limb. But they had seen him in town with Titus and supposed that they had brought him into the temple, which was a death sentence. And they weren't going to wait for Roman permission. They were going to act then. Paul was saved. at that moment by some other type of Titan who rescued him. Anyway, Titus needed the background. He needed the education. He needed to be filled in on what true doctrine was. Because you come out of a world of paganism and it's basically made up by humans. That's what Jesus denounced the Pharisees and Sadducees for doing. Unless your righteousness exceeds theirs, you're not going anywhere. And he could have pointed them out because they had spies in his groups of people listening in. But he says, no, your righteousness needs to exceed that of those who have set themselves up as your religious leaders because they've gotten sidetracked. So even the Jewish people had to be taught true doctrine. This is how Satan works. Satan works with 3 words that I've had in my understanding. 3 words that start with D. One is to distract you. Peter took his eyes off of Jesus, began to sink. Fortunately, his faith was enough. He knew who to call out to for help. But if Satan can distract us, like in the Garden of Eden, he could distract them with looking at the fruit from a different viewpoint. And it worked, didn't it? And it keeps working, doesn't it? And even today, we have people who claim the name, but who are following their traditions and their own feelings. That's why Jesus said, if you want to be my disciple, so you don't have to, but if you want to, you have to deny yourself. You must deny yourself because yourself has already taken you the wrong way, hasn't it? I like the Fidelity commercial that used to be on TV where they said, stay on the green arrow, the green line. And the guy's walking down the street after talking to his financial advisor, and he passes a car dealership, sees the sports car in there, and he stops, he takes a look, tap on the shoulder. No, follow the line. We get so easily distracted. Satan is so good at doing that he distracted God's people so that when God's answer for the solution to the sin problem arrived, who noticed it? We'll get there in the study here because you study the topics of Advent. You get to the birth stories. Who noticed the first Advent, the first Epiphany? God. His gift to the world. This reminds me of a friend of mine who was dealing with a lot of health problems with his parents. And they both died within a week of each other, actually. But it was in the late season of the year, like right now. They had gotten together all their gifts that they wanted to give to the family members. And the family members then, what this season turned into was saying farewell. 2 years later, they were selling their house and moving into, they were downsizing. They were cleaning out the cupboard, and he ran across the gifts his parents had gave him. They had gotten so busy, those got shelved, forgotten about them. When they opened them, they had a lot more meaning. He admitted it had a lot more meaning than if they had opened them at the time. Okay, so with God's greatest gift of all time, no one noticed. If God hadn't put a star in the sky, 3 professors from the Middle East would have just never noticed. Shepherds out in the fields, if it hadn't been for the angels breaking in and epiphanying there and scaring them to death, who would have known? The hustle and bustle in the town of Bethlehem, you could hear. I did see it staged one time and acted out, and I thought it was quite clever. that people in Bethlehem at the inn, we don't have any more rooms. I cannot find another one for you. I mean, people are sleeping in the lobby. And turning away a very pregnant Mary, who wandered over to sit down on a bale of hay and started giving birth. Later, baby in a feeding trough. What kind of parents are these going to be? Maybe someone should take that child and raise it up right. You know, these parents don't deserve to be having children. Stuffing them in a feeding trough. You know, all this was going on. And the people in town mulling around because of all the chaos that was going on. And then you hear a couple other guys trying to eat a meal, saying, yeah, just see those smelly ruffian shepherds coming into town, looking into barns. That's what was going on in Bethlehem at the time. Who noticed? Well, God couldn't let it go unnoticed. But even then, a group of shepherds, the malcontents, people you wouldn't want in your house without changing their shoes and clothes before they come in. They stink. And two old people, 8 days later, when they went to dedicate him to God, had him circumcised in the temple. Old man, old woman, come walking up. Because the Holy Spirit told them. That's what you've been waiting for. When did their report get out? I have a sermon. I have the outline here. If you want to look at it, you're welcome to. Called The Unexpected Messiah. Satan had done such a good job at distorting the scriptures that when the gift was right in their midst, in a huge crowd, no one noticed. It's almost sad, isn't it? How sad. But God does not act the way we expect him to. By the time Jesus came, they'd given up. So the first Sunday of Advent, being next Sunday, is that of hope. That is, well, I'll get you there when we study that. But it's important for Titus to understand, because being a pagan, remember Paul said our message is a scandal, is a stumbling block to the Jews. And the stumbling block was what armies used to do in the front lines when they would be the first to engage the enemy. They would pull blocks of stone or something like that in the way of the oncoming enemy to trip them up, slow them down. Okay. The gospel of Christ was a stumbling block to Jews. Because by the time Jesus finally showed up, they were not looking for that kind of a Messiah. And it was foolishness. He could have said a more harsher word for being stupid. But that was their message among Gentiles. Your God became one of you and then got lynched by his own people? What kind of a God is that? What kind of God can help you with that? What? And that was a lot of the talk in this story, in the histories of the time period. The Romans actually, there were drawings on walls in places where they thought the Christians were discovered, showing the head of a mule on a human hung on a cross, saying the person's name, who was a common man's name at the time for a Christian, worships his God. And you know another name for the donkey. Yeah, the Romans had another name for it too, like we do. That's how they thought about Christianity. So Titus had to be schooled. into what Jesus was doing here before he could actually give that away. Paul had brought him to the point, brought his faith to the point where he was into Christ, baptized, surrounded by him completely. But he needed to know how to lead a congregation to find out what he was doing here. So, in chapter 1 of Titus, and it's a good study if you want to take some time to read through it. He says in verse 5, the reason I left you in Crete was that you might straighten out what was left unfinished and appoint elders in every town as I had directed you. Now, he's on the island of Crete. And Paul will go on to say about Cretans. You know what it means to be a Cretan, don't you? They have no morals whatsoever at all. And they're proud of it. Sound familiar? Are we kind of living in that kind of a culture today? Yeah. How would you preach Christianity and self-control in that kind of a culture? So, to someone who doesn't really understand fully the message of Christ, you can see then why John Stott really took on Titus and Timothy, because Timothy was raised in a duel. His mother and his grandmother at least gave him some of the basis. But Paul helped to finish it up. So, he's going on to say how we're supposed to live. Look verse 10 of chapter 1 of Titus. For there are many rebellious people, mere talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision group. Ooh. He's not talking about the Jews there as much as he's talking about the Jews who have become Christians and think that everybody has to become Jewish before they can become saved. The sign of circumcision is what they demanded. Well, they must be silenced because they're ruining whole households by teaching things they ought not to teach, and that for the sake of dishonest gain. They win people to their side of the argument, and they feel they've won. People today, I firmly believe, many of them think the Bible was written so that we could have a proof text to prove and argue and win an argument on what we believe.
Translation of it says, they teach these things in order to make money. I developed a relationship one time with a Methodist preacher in a little town we were living in. And we studied together quite often. And he didn't believe what the Methodists taught. I said, but you know, it says right here in the Methodist manual, because I studied.
Yeah.
And I said, he said, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
I said, well, why are you here? He said, because when I retire, they'll put me up in a retirement home, and I'll have no worries.
Yeah.
It wasn't a matter of belief, it was a matter of financial security.
Yeah, well, Paul mentioned those who preach the gospel for profit. I knew, I was in one place when they said they were looking for a preacher. I helped them out a couple times. But they want a man who's going to bring the people in because we have bills to pay. What's he? The bigger the attendance, you start proclaiming that giving is essential. The more people you have, the more income. Yeah. And that was definitely the case in Corinth. And Paul refused to take their money. Oh, they were mad. They were offended. My money's not good for you. You got many other preachers that are taking your money. Why don't you go bother them? What happens when they start paying you?
Start doing what they want you to do.
You're no longer your own person. They start demanding. Where I was before, they wanted to increase my pay. Nope. Because I knew what they had in the back of their minds. I knew the things that were going on around there, and they wanted someone else to do these things for them. Nope. Ain't happening. You give more, I'll just give it somewhere else. So that's what happens. All right. Even one of their own people has said Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, lazy gluttons, and the testimony is true, he says. Even when they become Christians, they don't get rid of all that, do they? No, they're going to need some people who are the example of what they need to be while we're in this time between the Epiphanies. We need someone who is going to grow these people spiritually so that when the second Epiphany happens, it's not unnoticed. Now, God has promised, Jesus even promised, when I come, you're all going to know it the second time. Because the first time, if Luke hadn't written it down for us, or Matthew, only Matthew and Luke record this. If they hadn't written it down, we would have no history of it whatsoever. All the Mark and John have, and the other Gospels, is when he started his ministry. The greatest gift of all time, one of the greatest miracles God performed. Talking about faith, it would have been all gone. Well, Paul says, therefore, rebuke them sharply so that they will be sound in the faith and will pay no attention to Jewish myths or to the commands of those who reject the truth. He puts the Jewish people off with the pagans, doesn't he? Well, yeah. Here's the gift from God, and they've rejected it. They killed it because it wasn't what they wanted. And that's what idolatry is. I've heard people say, well, if what you say is true, then I don't want a God like that. Well, you've heard it before too, Russ. Yes. It's not up to us to make God in our image. We have to change and fit Him as His image, and that is not easy. And we need, according to Paul here with Titus, all right. He says, to the pure all things are pure, but to those who are corrupted and do not believe, nothing is pure. In fact, both their minds and their consciences are corrupted. How do you get through to people like that? Only by showing them. They claim to know God, but by their actions, they deny Him. Just like Peter did, right? I don't know the man. Not long earlier in the evening, he was going to go to his death defending him. He did. He made good on it too, didn't he? He took a swing, didn't he? Tried to cut off a guy's head. Yeah. Well, they're detestable. They're disobedient. They're unfit for doing anything good. You, into chapter 2, must teach what is in accord with sound doctrine. True doctrine. Not mixed doctrine. Mixed with tradition. And it really is a rare person, even in Christianity today, who knows the difference between tradition and doctrine. Most of our divisions are over traditions and practices. Teach the older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled, sound in the faith, in love, and in endurance. Because they need to be the examples for everybody else. Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine, but to teach what is good, useful, helpful. Then they can train the younger women. Oh my gosh, you have to learn to love your husbands? A lot of marriages were arranged back then. They weren't together out of love. It was a financial decision. So a lot of times you had to learn to love them. And in the Fiddler on the Roof, the wife said, Tibia, do you love me? And they're singing about it. And he comes to realize, yeah, I guess in the intervening days, I guess I came to love you. He was trying to matchmake his daughters by tradition. And they weren't following tradition. They were following love. And it was different. He didn't like it.
They wanted her to marry a butcher.
Because he could make money.
Because he had a nice house. And
Yeah, and that's how humans think.
It didn't work.
And he thought that was doctrine. But it was only tradition. Yeah. All right. Beloved husbands, be self-controlled and be pure, busy at home, to be kind, to be subject to their husbands, and that doesn't mean the slave and the servant. That just means seeing to their needs, so that no one will malign the word of God. So look at the home. All right. Similarly, encourage young men to be self-controlled in everything. Set them an example by doing what is good. In your teaching, show integrity, seriousness, soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you, notice those who will oppose you, it's going to happen, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. Don't give the enemy any ammunition. Teach slaves to be subject to their masters and everything. Now that would be employees in our culture today. Try to please them, not to talk back to them and not to steal from them, but to show that they can be fully trusted, so that in every way they will make the teaching about God our Savior attractive. We have to make the gospel attractive to a pagan world, to a selfish world. We already got enough strikes against us. We can't abide with anymore. Why? Verse 11. Here's the main point. For the grace of God that brings salvation has epiphanied to all men. Jesus showed up. Yeah, it was a bit late, wasn't it? We got sidetracked, we got complacent, we got bored with our own stuff. We got into arguments we shouldn't, and we got a little off track. But you know what? Jesus showed up. That's the grace, the gift from God. He has appeared to all men. That grace, that gift of God, Jesus in his life, teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled instead of selfish, upright instead of immoral, godly lives, holiness, rather than what you think it says in this present age. And he's not talking about the first century. He's talking about the time between the Epiphanies, the already but not yet. While we wait for the blessed hope, the glorious second Epiphany of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all wickedness and purity, for himself, a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. Jesus came to clean us up. We've gotten a bit dirty in the meantime, haven't we? When's he coming again?
When he's ready.
Just like the first time. I pray, and in that sermon I mentioned, I left the people with the thought. I pray that when he comes again, we're ready. Paul says in Peter, too, there is no reason for a disciple of Christ to be caught unprepared on that day. No reason whatsoever. How long did it take him the first time? So far, the second one's been 2,000 years out. And yet in the book of Revelation, Jesus will say, behold, I come quickly. That's not very fast to me. But as Paul told Titus then, the already but not yet, Jesus came to clean us up for when he returns. Jesus says, blessed is the servant whom his master finds working when he comes. Jesus does not need us to drop everything, quit our jobs, go out and escort him home. He doesn't need an escort home. Why not?
Because he knows.
This isn't our home. It's not his home either.
No.
He's not coming to stay here, even though they get misunderstood in Revelation about the 1,000-year reign. Now, when Jesus comes back, he's taking us home.
And how must he feel being down here with us humans? I mean...
Didn't feel good the first time either. And yet he's willing to do it again. The second time, though, quite a different outcome. Why didn't he just finish it all at the beginning? A lot of the critics throughout the ages have asked that question. When he came the first time, why didn't he just make it all right then?
Wasn't time.
It wasn't time, but he also, remember, he's living in the past, the present, and the future. He can see all three at the single moment. We can only see what's here before us right now. Learn from the past to hopefully change the future. He can see all of time in one single moment. And he sees all the people that could be here. So he came to clean it up to make it even better for them. So when he comes again, those are the righteous people he can collect. So that is where we are. That's what time it is. And I think it's good that a lot of religious groups are taking the time these next few Sundays to think about the time when Jesus came the first time. How could it have been changed so that he would not have come in obscurity? The unexpected Messiah was not what anybody expected. Let's get the distortions corrected. Let's get the distractions moved out. Let's put our hope in God and in Jesus when he comes again. That's what we'll talk about next week. I have a handout. If you want one early, you can have one. Or you can wait till next week. But think about the people now who are talking about that first coming. Help them finish the story. Because the first coming, that was a good part. But the most important part is yet to come. We need to hold out our hope with our faith and our love for when he comes back. All right, we'll pick up from there then next week.